What factor did God not consider when he selected Israel to be his people in the Old Testament? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Deuteronomy on Walking Through the Bible.
Glory of his cross.
If you have a Bible with you, turn to Deuteronomy chapter 7. We're going to be reading from verses 1 to 11. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So Deuteronomy chapter 7, beginning verse 1. When the Lord your God brings you into the land which you go to possess, and has cast out many nations before you, the Hittites and the Girgashites and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and mightier than you, and when the Lord your God delivers them over to you, you shall conquer them and utterly destroy them. You shall make no covenant with them, nor show mercy to them, nor shall you make marriages with them. You shall not give your daughters to their sons, nor take their daughters for your son. For they will turn your sons away from following me to serve other gods, so the anger of the Lord will be aroused against you and destroy you suddenly. But thus you shall deal with them. You shall destroy their altars, and break down their sacred pillars, and cut down their wooden images, and burn their carved images with fire. For you are a holy people to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for himself, a special treasure above all peoples on the face of the earth. The Lord did not set his love on you, nor choose you because you are more in number than any other people, for you are the least of all peoples, but because the Lord loves you, and because he would keep the oath which he swore to your fathers. The Lord has brought you out with a mighty hand and redeemed you from the house of bondage, from the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Therefore, know that the Lord your God, he is God, the faithful God who keeps covenant and mercy for 1,000 generations to those who love him and keeps his commandments. And he repays those who hate him to their face and to destroy them. He will not be slack with him who hates you. He will repay him to his face. Therefore you shall keep the commandment, the statutes, and the judgments which I command you today to observe them. Moses has been warning Israel that they needed to obey God's law that he was giving them if things were going to go well for them in the land of Canaan. If they worshipped God and followed his commandments, God would be with them. If, however, they went after idols, God would be angered and they would be destroyed from the land. It's easy for Moses to say, don't go after idols, and it should have been easier for Israel to heed that warning and put it into practice. But you have to ask yourself, what would cause Israel to go after other gods in the first place? For after all, at that time, they were worshiping the true God. This generation had not grown up in Egypt and seen their gods. What would possess them to serve idols? The answer is the influence of the other nations. Recall in Numbers 25, the people of Moab got Israel to worship other gods by enticing them with idolatrous women. And God destroyed the people involved in that. That is why Israel was told to utterly destroy the peoples in the land of Canaan, so that they wouldn't lead them off into idolatry. They weren't to make covenants with them, nor show them mercy. They weren't to give their sons to the foreign daughters in marriage, nor give their daughters to the foreign sons in marriage. If they did so, it would only be a matter of time before those foreign people would lead Israel away, not just into idolatry among one family, but idolatry in the entire nation. And should this happen, the Lord will deal with them for their rebellion. Thus, when they got to the promised land, they were to kill the inhabitants of that land, break down their pillars where they worshipped these false gods, and burn all of the carved images in fire so as to destroy all the vestiges of the idolatry that existed in Canaan. Now, before moving on, let's deal with 2 issues that often arise from this story. Issue number 1, God approves of genocide. I know we've discussed this in our other studies of the Old Testament, but it bears repeating. The nations in Canaan were not being destroyed because they were Canaanites, but because they were sinful idolaters. Let's not underestimate the total affront to the holiness and character of God that worshiping idols is. God is our creator, yet we decide to worship some corrupt thing that we created. God will simply not allow that to stand unpunished. So what Israel was commanded to do here was not genocide, but merely executing divine judgment. The second issue arises out of archaeology, which shows us that the Canaanites still lived in the land after it is said that Israel conquered it, and that idolatry remained quite common. If only these archaeologists would actually read the whole Bible, and the answer would become quite clear. In Joshua and Judges, it will be revealed to us that Israel did in fact not utterly destroy the Canaanites, and the Canaanites did exactly what God said: lead Israel off into idolatry that God had to constantly correct Israel from, just as is said here in Deuteronomy. Verse 6 lays out the ultimate reason that Israel was to destroy these idols, though. They were a holy people who worshipped before a holy God. Idolatry was unholy and abominable, and thus needed to be destroyed. Now, why did God select Israel to be this holy people, this special treasure above all the peoples on the face of the earth at that time? He didn't do so because they were more in number than any other people, for when God chose Israel, Abraham was only one man with no children. Now, by the time Moses spoke these words, Israel was much larger, with estimates of 2 to 3 million people at that time. But when God selected them, it was just Abraham. The Lord had to select someone through whom he would fulfill his promises, and he selected Abraham because Abraham was a man of faith. God loved Abraham, who would be known as the friend of God. And of course, God made a covenant with Abraham of a great nation which would possess the land of Canaan after being in bondage. And so, because of Abraham, God loved the Israelite people who stood on the precipice of taking Canaan, and because of his oath that he made to Abraham, God brought Israel up out of Egypt with a mighty hand. In telling Israel this, Moses was trying to show Israel that they were not better than other peoples in the sense of worth or worthiness, but God had loved them and selected them to accomplish his purpose. And for this reason, they were to keep God's commandments, statutes, and judgments, for the Lord will keep his promises, not only his promises of blessings and mercy to the 1,000 generations of those that love him, where 1,000 represents completeness, but God also keeps his promises of judgment to those who disobey them. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 12 to 16, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time.
Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.
Of his cross.